showing me his live. Let's check that out. Let's go over here. Let's log in here. Morning, everyone. Just get ourselves situated here. Click there. How do I see Adam Quiney? But where am I live? Add profile section, about, activity. Is that what I want to see? Posts. Where do you show up, Adam? Thanks everyone for hanging out while we work out these little gremlins, so to speak. Okay, there I am on Facebook. Now, the real mystery to me is, am I on LinkedIn? Video? Adam Quiney start a post? I don't see me. That's weird. Doesn't appear to be showing up anywhere. Adam Quiney, you, executive coach. Cool. I like that guy. Oh, there he is. Post by Adam live. Okay, neat. We are officially live. As you can see right there, this is the introduction segment of the live show. I'm going to take a sip of tea together, as we always do, to start these off. I'm going to slurp it for added disgustingness and mirth on my part. Oh boy, it's been a week for me. Lots of ups and downs in the realm of transformation. Get this nice and clear there. Perfect. I think I'm going to just open this. How do I click this? Here? Where do I click to make this big? Like that? Nope. That was not the thing I wanted to click. Oh well, whatever. Now I've ruined it. There we go. There's the live. Okay, well, nevertheless, here we are. Hopefully comments show up. Hopefully this works as intended. I'll click that one for sure, and I'll mute this. Okay, perfect. Yeah, dickens of a week. There's been lots of ups and downs. There's been some wins for me. There's been some I would call it like checking of my stride. And the thing I'm really present to is that's what it means to live a fully experienced, fully expressed life. So a lot of us want, when people come to coaching or transformational work, when people start into any kind of conversation like that, they'll say, I want, and then they'll say something. And often there's the tangible results they probably want, but the reason they want those tangible results is because it's going to provide them, some experience they're hoping for. I want a sense of more adventure. I want a sense of more presence in my life. I want more intimacy with my partner. I want more authenticity with my friends. And these are amazing things. These are excellent things to seek out, to aim ourselves towards. But what we don't understand is that those things are, I guess I put it, they come at a cost. It's not really a cost. We relate to it as a cost. But the nature of more presence means that you're going to be present with more. And so the reason we don't already have more presence, the reason we don't yet have what we want, is because there's some reason we learned to shut that out. Like if you look at a child is inherently trusting, or a baby or whatever. A child is inherently trusting, inherently generous, inherently present. Kids don't go around sort of out of the womb like, I'm not going to be present to this stranger over here. And so what happened somewhere along the way is that we got fed a reason, or rather we got fed input. We created a reason that it's not safe to be present with that. And then we learned how to kind of parcel that off and set it aside in our psyche so that we don't have to really be with it. Even if physically it's in our space, we can diminish our presence to it. We can make it go away so that it's there, but we don't have to be with it. And that's how we lose presence. That's the process by which we end up not with so much presence. And so when we come to the table and say, I want more presence, what we don't realize, we realize intellectually, but we don't really realize that means we're going to have to be present with that thing that was the very reason we shut down our presence in the first place. So if I want a life that is more fully expressed in terms of my ability to be present with everything happening, that might mean that I have to be present to more anger or more sadness or more joy, or whatever it happens to be. And there's all the good stuff for which we want that new experience, but there's all the stuff that we don't tend to like that much that also is there and that also comes along for the ride. And so I think in a lot of my experience meeting with coaches and talking to people in this profession, there's a lot of trying to change that. There's a lot of sort of trying to sugarcoat it or like make it all right. And part of the journey to, for example, more presence is being with not only the feeling we don't like, but also being with the part of ourselves that doesn't feel that that's okay. And we can't be okay with something until we can be with the part of ourselves that is not okay with it. You can hear, it looks like Grimby is like, let me in. I'm going to be really annoying. No, no, Grimby, you must stay out. The cajon blocks the way. So it's been a fully present life over the last week for me. Lots of ups and downs, and I'm often reminded of it's a Zen quote. I believe it's a Zen quote. Maybe it's some other ancient Chinese wisdom or something like that. But the way it goes is regarding the journey of consciousness, of growing your consciousness, of becoming more consciousness. Regarding that journey, better not to start. But once started, better to finish. And of course, those of us in this game know there is no finish point. But it's facetiously acknowledging that there's like a bliss to our ignorance. And that bliss comes at its own cost, which is to say, like, we end up feeling victimized a lot of the time by the people around us because we can't see our role in how we shaped the way things went. And consequently, if we can't see our role, who could it be other than this person? They did it to me. They gaslit me. They did whatever. And while that is kind of lacking in power, lacking in our ability to lead, lacking in our ability to make things, all of that sort of stuff, there's also a bliss to it because it's not your fault and you don't have to do anything and you just go around life pushing those people out. And over time, what happens is life contracts, or rather we contract from life and life becomes smaller and smaller. But the nice thing is we get to be blissfully ignorant to that fact too. And it's just like, people suck. So anyhow, I'm present to the sort of the bliss of like not starting the journey of consciousness. And in sharing all of that, I'm also grateful for being on this path and getting to walk it. Let's see. Anything else about the day that I can, or the week that I can share before getting into our show proper? I think what I'll share is one thing I'm working on, and I might have shared this when I did my interview with Craig Graymont, which is a good one to check out if you haven't seen. Cray's this cantankerous, awesome dude who is in the realm of transformation. He writes a lot of good stuff. I often like what he has to say. And I might have shared this at the top of the episode I did with him, but I notice there's been something I've noticed, and I noticed this when I was a squash player. When I played in tournaments, I'd get very what I would call performative. I'd get very interjection. If you're one of these two viewers right here, two viewers, tell me your name, say hello in the comment, just so I can be like, what up, and give you a shout out. When I would play in, so the arc of my squash game was competitive. I'm very reliable to go to do drills. Like I'm very reliable to practice something because I love the act of improving. And if I don't find myself improving, I'm not the sort of person that's interested in just like, let's go and just muddle through and do our best and see how things go. And that's not to say like I don't find comfort, or hey Cynthia, nice to see you. It's not to say I don't find enjoyment if I'm not improving. Like it's not, I can't have fun unless, but this is the reason I don't find playing games that are largely based on chance that enjoyable. Like War, the game where you just keep flipping and whoever's the high card collects and you just keep doing that. Or for a while there's this game called Exploding Kittens that people, is made by the creator of Oatmeal. It's a very funny game, but like the game itself is pretty shallow. And hola King Medina. Nice to see you. And hey Hans. And so those sort of games I lose interest in because there's not really a path to improve, and it's the act of improving that I really enjoy. And so in squash, it's very reliable to go and practice. I did drills with my friends. I played a lot. I was a good player. But every time I would then join a tournament or play in some kind of like a league where there were stakes, I would do terribly. And what I've noticed would happen is I would get very performative as in I would feel there was a need to perform a particular way. And then all of the joy would go out and I would energetically and physically feel very tight in my body. And what I eventually stopped doing was playing tournaments. I was like, I'm not having fun doing this. And people would say, well, you could work through that. You're a coach, right? And the answer is, yeah, totally could. But I have a million and one areas in my life that I'm always in the process of working through. You know, I'm very reliable to work with my coach, to work with my teachers, to be leaning into this stuff. I kind of wanted a place where I didn't have to do that. And so that was the choice I made. Now we can fast forward now to where we are. And I'm playing pickleball and I play in a bunch of leagues and the same thing's present. And I don't want to not play. I enjoy it. And so I'm really taking a look at this. And what I'm noticing is that that same tendency shows up. And so I just want to share sort of what my inquiry looks like. You know, I finished my league play last Monday and I was driving home and I sent my coach a message just saying like, you know, here's what I notice. And what happens is I get frustrated, I get tense, I get fixated on trying to make a result happen. And then it's not fun. And on top of that, the result doesn't happen. And so there's a bunch of stuff I can see, but I just want to share briefly, you know, the inquiries that I'm in around this right now are a few. One is, what has this part of me attached to an outcome? So there's a part of me that gets hooked in, that gets caught, like I've got to create an outcome. I've got to win. It's really important I play good. What is it that has that part of me do that? And you know, some of the ways we could think of it is like, what is that part of me? What is its job? What is it trying to protect me from? Like, if I got that outcome, then what am I safe from? Or what do I get to avoid by ensuring that? Kind of the same question. Or what feels important in this moment about winning? Why is that so crucial? And I want to be clear, it's not just winning and losing, because when I play outside of a situation where there's sort of these kind of stakes, I can win and play to win just fine. Very reliable. So I'm looking down that lens, you know, like this whatever part of me that feels that contraction and that needs to make things happen. What is that designed for? And what's the other question here? If this part of me stopped getting me attached, what is it afraid will happen? So if that attachment fell away, if I didn't grab a hold of that and try really hard to force an outcome, what is that part of me concerned will then happen? And what this inquiry does is it allows me to look beyond the surface of like win at all costs, or I need to win and I'm just that way, you know, famous words for, you can put that on the epitaph of a tombstone for transformation. I'm just that way, end of transformation. So I could end there, but instead I really want to look, I want to look at it through the lens of, what is going on under the surface? What is it that I can't be with? And then the practice becomes, okay, can I practice being with that? Can I allow that to show up in me? And like I have some hunches, you know, like disappointment. I can't be with disappointing other people, leaving people in the experience of feeling let down by me. That's really tough. I really don't like that feeling. And the second thing that I'm really holding as I am in this inquiry with myself is, I really want to hold this like an inquiry, like curiosity, rather than I need the answer to this so I can fix this problem. Because as soon as we get there, it's like the next iteration of being contracted and performative. You know, like, oh no, I'm contracted and performative, and that's bad. And so now I will try to figure out the answer to that so I can perform getting rid of performing. So you can see it's like all of this stuff can make us absolutely insane. And so the journey back to the heart and the journey back to unfolding in all of this is to like really come to it from a place of curiosity, like, isn't that interesting that's there? What are you there to show me? What are you trying to protect me from? So that's the kind of inquiry that's present for me right now, at least over the course of this week. And Cynthia, just writing, these are such great questions. Yeah, they really, you know, when I find when I can look at this stuff with grace and curiosity instead of frustration and annoyance, man, a lot can change. All right, well, we should update this headline. And how do I do that again? Is it here? Edit name headline. Yeah, and we're going to go from introduction to. Oh, look at that! I've got this here. The ontology of high stakes arena. Let's come back to that because I just talked about that. So we're going to talk about the injustice of transformation. This is very appropriate because we're living in a time where there's a great deal of injustice. You could argue. I mean, maybe some people feel like finally justice is being sown, being hewn, being reaped. But many other people will argue, no, it's not. There's a lot of unjustness. And so justice is this idea that we carry within us as humans, that there's a objective right. There's a right way to be objectively. And we attach a large number of labels to that, like integrity or good, or sometimes we call it generosity. You know, you could look and find all of these different labels, definitions for this term, this idea. But it's this internal state we have that things should unfold a particular way and humans should behave according to a particular set of norms. And this causes all kinds of problems, and it's also very important. So it causes all kinds of problems. For example, like if I have a normative value, meaning like a right wrong around being in integrity, the way that causes problems is I start to become very judgmental of people that I feel don't have integrity. And the more judgmental I have of other people not having integrity, the more I become vested in the idea that I am someone who does have integrity. Because we don't walk around, I mean, we have crappy stories about ourselves, but we have an identity, and our identity is generally that we don't do that which we judge others for. That's part of how judgment works. And so I've got this judgment of people when they're out of integrity. I don't like that. I have a real bee in my bonnet about that. And so when I look to see, well, am I out of integrity here? I have an immediate resistance to that idea. Hell no, I would never do that. I hate those people. Why would I be that person? That's kind of how that plays out. And so now there's a problem. That's great if I just happen to be this person who's perfectly in integrity, or that like is only out of integrity in the places that I can currently see it. But that's not really how our blind spots work. The way our blind spots work is that judgment tells me, the judgment I have of other people kind of convinces me I would never be that way. And then I am unwilling, effectively, unconsciously, unwilling to look at the places where that's true. And so those places stay hidden. They stay out of my consciousness. And consequently, I have no capacity to be responsible for them or to do anything with them. And so now I'm left as a man walking through the world, frustrated by the lack of integrity on other people, committed to the idea that I am someone in integrity, and then occurring to other people kind of like a hypocrite. Because the truth is, it's impossible for you as a human being not to be constantly in and out of integrity. And so this norming, this normative idea of right and wrong and the good way to be, it's really problematic because it fucks us up. It makes it impossible for us to see a deeper truth. And you don't have to do anything about this. It's fine to walk around like that. That's what most of us are doing. But transformational work is about discovering that which, hold on, there's a way I want to say this that would sound really eloquent. But it's not going to happen. Transformation is about discovering that which is hidden about ourselves, about seeing what we cannot yet see is true about ourselves so that we can embrace it, integrate it, and then broaden our being, become more than we already are. I'm going to turn the lighting up for this so we get a little, I think I'm going to go with classy blue video. For those of you listening audio, you're missing, look at this. Mirror. Oh, that's so classy. Very, very Seahawks. So we've got this issue. First of all, the problem with justice. I want to be clear, justice is also really important. Like, I think that there's a great value in our society about codifying these laws that have us transcend our baser instincts. You know, the baser instincts of all life is based in survival of the fittest. Evolutionarily speaking, that's how we arrived here. And so on some level, that's always at play. But we as humans have like this miraculous thing called consciousness, and the ability to sort of like rise above those baser impulses, and to codify that into law is a really important thing. And so we have a system of justice that kind of does its best to recognize, if you do this harm to someone, then there is a recompense, there is a compensation that needs to happen that flows back to that person to set them back to their prior state so that they're whole and complete to the best of our ability to do that. So this topic is not about defund the judiciary or something like that. What this is about is the fact that the more we are attached to the idea that outside of our system of laws, people should act in a way that is just, the more we're attached to that, the harder transformational work becomes. What are you saying here, Dave? This whole conversation feels like a load off on multiple fronts. Help me understand what you mean by a load off. I have many different interpretations of what that might mean. So we do have a justice system that's of value, but we want to impose this idea of justice on everything everyone does constantly. And so what happens is we get into the work of, say, relationships, which lots of transformation ultimately happens in. It's relational because that's where humans contact and bump into each other. And from that place, something happens in a relationship and we are left feeling wronged. Now, the truth of relationship is that both people have their own truth about how things went. I'll give you a very simple example using pickleball, which is why we're all here. In a match I was playing last Sunday, we were at a very heated point in the game. My team, my partner and I were down 15-20. And the other team hit a shot. And it was a close shot. And ostensibly, if it was in, it would have won. And the other team was very excited about this. They cheered. My partner and I looked at each other. We both felt the shot was out. And the responsibility for that call, is always on the team receiving the shot. Now, you could be a jerk and just call every shot out, but that's not what I'm committed to being. But nevertheless, in this moment, when we made that out call, there was two truths on the table. The other team thought that's a terrible call. That shot was so in, it could not have been more in. It was obvious to us. And to us, we were like, that shot was out. We both looked at it. We both felt that immediately. That was the honest call. That was our from a place of integrity, meaning that we say what we think and we act in alignment with what we say. We thought that was out, and so we're going to call it out. Now, so you could take this metaphorically and put it anywhere, right? Any relational issue you have with your spouse, you have with your children, you have with your friends, you have with a stranger you bumped into. There are two truths on the table, and we will not really be able ever to get at the objective truth. You could set up a camera and check the pickleball, all of that stuff. But that's not the point here. The point here is that that two truths are on the table. And in transformational work, we're always working with these two truths. There's always my experience over here and the experience of my client. And what happens in transformational work when we are practicing leading transformationally or coaching from a transformational place, or just being with people from a commitment to come from a transformed place, what ends up happening is this. Something like this is going to happen. And then we get into this really challenging place. Because as a leader, our direct report is going to come to us and complain about something we did. And we might really feel like, yeah, but that's your shit. You're complaining that I took up all the space, but I sat there for 45 minutes before I said anything, waiting for you to step into the space. What do you want from me? I could wait a whole hour, but it's over there with you. And so when we get into this idea of justice, we get hooked, we get entrenched in our own story. We get caught up in our own truth. And so then the conversation becomes very win-lose, zero-sum. Either I'm right or you're right, and that's the end of it. And transformational work demands, or rather asks of us, that we set aside our positionality and that we be the ones to go first and model taking responsibility. Meaning, even though, one sec. I had a burp and a tea sip at the same time. It was it's like a miniature orgasm. But also dangerous move. So I don't recommend trying that at home. So I, as a leader, am working to support you to develop, and you have a story about how I showed up, and I have my story of how you showed up. And in this work, what we do is we set aside our story. We practice setting that aside so that we can model responsibility, so that we can show you how responsibility is taken outside of a story about when or if not or whatever. Because ultimately in transformational work, the high water mark we aim for is 100% responsible. A leader that can be 100% responsible for what happened is a leader with the most access to their own power. I am not talking about being a doormat or folding or just letting people step over you. I'm talking about deepening your ability to see how you created what happened, how you, through your actions, set up a space in which what occurred. And everyone can do this. I can do that, and simultaneously so can the other person do that. We can both take a look on our side at the same time. So this is not a zero-sum game, but when we're stuck in the idea of justice, it occurs that way. And so this is really tough for people to get up to this idea of solely looking on our side, because they're like, but then you're giving up your position and you're letting the other person get away with stuff. And so this is one of the most challenging things I see people struggle with, is we don't want to give over that power. We don't want to give that away. We don't want to take a look on our side because we're fixated on what that person did, because this is wrong for me to have to look first. And the nature of transformational work is that we relinquish that. And so, on a journey to leadership, I see people struggle with this constantly. And I myself struggle with this often. And there's always a part of me that I have to set aside in these moments. Like what happens is something will occur and I'll just be angry and annoyed, and that lawyer part of me will kick into action and build like an exquisite case. And my process is often to the best of my ability, let that guy go for as long as he needs to go until I'm like, okay, are we ready to set that aside now? Because I want to achieve this higher road. I want to take this opportunity to practice deepening as a leader in this moment. And again, looking over here to see how I created this so that next time I can get out in front of it. The bypass version of this is people try to look at how they created it while still staying entrenched in it's not my fault. And so the version of that is like, okay, well, what I can see to be responsible for is that I should have seen this person was a narcissist. So going forward, I'm going to just make sure that I never talk to narcissists. And that is sort of like, that's what the ego likes to do. It likes to keep you exactly where you are, but then give you the illusion of using the higher level of practice. And that will never work. It tends to be very unsatisfying, and it tends to occur very arrogant and righteous. It's very self-justified. And so when we practice this transformational work from this place, we do things like practice forgiveness in getting to a point where there is nothing actually to forgive. That's the high watermark of forgiveness, is if I can work myself out, if I can really see how I was doing my very best and the other person was doing their very best, and there was actually nothing wrong. Everyone was acting with total innocence in that space. Then I'm not left with like a need to begrudgingly let them off the hook. It just becomes like, oh, there isn't a hook in the first place. And I can see from here, maybe going forward, I'm going to be a little more alive to this, or check in, or, whatever it happens to be. But I do so much less from a place of righteousness or anger or reaction or whatever it happens to be. So ultimately, what I want to be clear on here is that anytime we're stepping into transformation, on some level, we're letting go of this notion of a normative justice, of a right way for people to be, or a right way for people to show up. And I want to be really clear that it's a tall order. That is not easy to do that, and that is not how humans are wired. So this is let me bump my mic there. This is another one of those situations where we're transcending our baser impulse. Our baser impulse is rooted in justice because that ensures sort of a social order in the tribe. If you do something wrong to that person and you don't make good, if you don't, sort of help sort that out, boom, you're out of the tribe. And that worked in a primitive setting, but as we get more and more evolved and we layer more and more and more stuff on top of this, we strive for something beyond that. We strive for a higher place to come from. What'd you write here, Dave? Dave writes, a bit of permission and how-to around integrity and others' judgments of me about integrity. Some neurodivergent folks, Dave writes, have the things I should have said in conversation stick for years. I have feelings of being out of integrity linger like that. I just want to read that. Some neurodivergent folks have this stick of there's things I should have said in conversation. Interesting. I think that that's something very common for everyone. I think most people have, I should have said this or I should have done that. Why did I let them get away with this? Why did I let them get away with that? All of that is kind of a blame game, right? I should have done something differently, or they should have done something differently. And when we start to practice forgiveness and transformation and letting go of justice and being with like, what can I see? We start to, instead of like, I should have said blah, 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 we start to drop down through our softening to questions like, what had me not say that? What was going on for me that had me not say that? And as we take the attention off them and put it back over here, we start to gain access to inquiries like, what was safe for me about not saying that? Where else in my life do I notice that there's something I want to say, but I don't? And what's the payoff for that? And what is perhaps the wound that might be showing up to heal when I'm in these situations? What might this person be an invitation, an unconscious invitation to me to start to heal in myself? And hopefully you can hear these sort of questions are much more generous. They're much softer, and they fly in the face of justice and that person did wrong. As long as that person did wrong, these kind of deeper levels of self-inquiry, they tend to elude us because all our attention gets driven over there, and it's hard to look inwards in that situation. Cool, nailed it. Way to go, Adam. Incredible topic. We should change the headline. We'd have a sip of tea too. I'm kind of like hoping for that burp again. Where's the double whammy? Bring it back. Can I hit enter? Oh, nice. All right. Get this piece of food out of my mouth. Make sure I'm nice and close to the mic as I do that. Let's talk about soft power and leadership. So you know what? I'm going to just create a checkbox here. Oh yeah, what a feeling. Damn, that feels good. So soft power and leadership is like this idea of the leader who's quiet and calm and has a gentle kind of power. Some of the archetypes of this might be like servant leadership, or this is not my distinction, but a friend of mine is taking a master's in leadership at one of the colleges out this way. And Cynthia asked a great question on our last topic. I'm going to come back to that in one sec, Cynthia. A friend of mine taking master's in leadership told me he was learning about different styles of leadership. And I was like, oh, what are some of the styles? So servant leadership, one example, the soft power. And then he said like, there's like a feminine leadership style, which, an entire leadership devoted to feminine, but that's just it. Blanket feminine leadership approach. But that would, if we don't castigate that, and if we just sort of hold it, likely what is being spoken to there is more of a softer approach to leadership, less directive, maybe more like democratic in its approach. What do you think? What do you think? Okay, let's get everyone's voice, that sort of stuff. So there's, especially in our current society, where what we have are a lot of models of aggressive, stereotypical masculine leadership. There's of course going to be this swing towards like a reactive swing towards the other side. Oh, soft leadership, soft power. What about soft power? And so I anticipate you're going to start to see like articles on this, or more articles, lots of really good AI generated content on this that does nothing to change the actual state of things, but is there all the same. And so I want to talk about a bit about this idea of soft power and leadership. Well, actually, before I do that, let's go to Cynthia's question. So just intermission here. Cynthia asks, how do you let go of this sense of injustice? So down our previous topic, right? We are trying to support someone. They say something. There's clearly an opportunity for us to take a look down the lens of responsibility, but we have this is unjust. Why should it go this way? How do we let go of that? So the path through which we let go of that it's a bumpy road. And the first thing I think is really helpful for us to recognize is that our default state is not to let go of it. I think that's really important for us to grok that the default will be not to let go of it. So anytime we're practicing this, it's going to be against our own resistance. Sort of like the default state for a dumbbell is to be resting on the floor through gravity. And anytime we want to lift the dumbbell up, it's going to be against our own resistance. And if we're like, why are weights heavy to lift? Because gravity. And it's easy to see with that. It's helpful for me to bring that same context to this. Like, oh, the basic emotional and psychological gravity for a human is to hang on to a sense of a need for justice. So now we know, okay, well, we're practicing in the face of this. Hey, Con, nice to see you, brother. We're practicing in the face of this. And just take a pause here. Con's asking, why would you want to let go of injustice? The reason for that, Con, is what we just talked about, that transformation is inherently unjust in that if I'm going to model taking responsibility and going first, hey, Andy, if I'm going to model something and take a higher road, actually this attachment to a normative state of justice is going to be in my way. So coming back to what Cynthia's asking, how do we let go of that? How do we transcend it to create something beyond I'm right and you're wrong, or you're right and I'm wrong? The first step is to recognize when we are hooked in this need for a just resolution in this relationship, this conversation I'm in, and it can be helpful just to give that part of ourselves space. Because what a lot of us do, now that you've heard this, or maybe you've read some other thing, is we're like, this is wrong, but I know that I should let go of that to be transformed so that I can do something different in the moment. So I shouldn't feel wrong. I need to be transformed. And that's going to be a problem. Because until the part of us that is raging against the machine or the injustice of how this person showed up, until we let that have a voice internally, we're going to be problematic. We can't leave a place until we've been there. And so step one is to actually be there. Let ourselves sit in that emotional thing, that emotional state. Once we've got that, then we can start to soften. And I find it helpful to ask, like, am I open to the possibility that there's something greater beyond this feeling of justice that I'm holding on to? I don't even have to know what it is. Just, am I open to the possibility that there could be something more that I'm not yet present to? That's the beginning of softening. It's the beginning of opening the doors to something greater. Am I open to it just being possible that there could be something there? And if yes, am I willing to practice to aim towards that? And then if the answer to that is no, great, your work's done for now. You just go back and let yourself stew in the injustice. If the answer is yes, and you're willing to aim towards that, then the next step is to start to ask those sort of questions, like to set them aside and ask yourself, like, what's getting triggered in me? What is this part of me designed to protect? Where else does this show up? We can sort of engage with these kind of types of inquiry that take the attention off the other person and bring it over here. I don't want to go too deeply into like a set of steps, because the heart of this is ultimately, the answer to your question, Cynthia, is we practice. And that's the most annoying answer I could possibly give you, because practicing is frustrating and it's hard work. And it's like going to the gym and being like, how, when I was a kid, in this comic book, an Archie comic book, there was like a Charles Atlas guide to become jacked. And in the photo, like, the advertisement panel, like this pencil-necked geek, everyone was a pencil-necked geek in Archie comics, got sand kicked in his face by this tough guy at the beach. And then he got this Charles Atlas book, and then he became jacked. And then he went back and kicked sand back in the bully's face. Take that, dickwad. So, so as a kid, I was like, sweet, Charles Atlas, I'm gonna get on board with this. So I ordered this thing, and I was expecting it had the way. Like, I was gonna read this, and it was going to somehow magic me up muscles. And it was such a bummer as a kid because I got it and it was like, it had a bunch of bullshit, but you could summarize all of it into lift weights. Go lift weights. That's the practice. And so it's also really helpful to know that like our human desire is that there's a technique that helps us drop this. And I provided some steps, but ultimately the work is to practice. And the way that we practice is recognizing when we're hooked, in this instance, by a need for justice, recognizing that that may be limited in what it can provide us, getting present to like there might be a possibility that there could be something beyond this and that we might have to let go of this attachment to justice to achieve that, and then practicing with it. Going internally with these inquiries, softening, letting that person off the hook, recognizing like, hey, what do I need right now? Aside from fixing that person, like what's getting triggered in me? What am I feeling is getting stepped over? What does that part of me need to say just here with me right now in conversation, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So these are the ways that we start to do this. But the hard work is you go to the gym. And the reason transformation is miraculous and simultaneously something people fall out of quite often is because it works if we keep going to the gym. But just like every February at your local gym, there's a whole bunch of people that show up in January, and by February, a lot of them drop off because they're like, this is a lot of work. And it's a lot of work. Andy says, I've got a conflict role play coming out next month of practice. Ooh, conflict role play. Can you share more about what is a conflict role play? I'd like to know about that. I'm going to note to self, move a little further away from the mic when I sip the tea. Y'all don't need to hear me slurping. Okay, great question, Cynthia. Thank you for bringing that. So let's come back to soft power and leadership. So we set this up, we were talking, there's always going to be a trend, especially when we see aggressive, stereotypical masculine leadership. That's not what masculine leadership actually is. It's the stereotype of it. We're going to see a push back towards soft. So there's a couple things I want to speak to. The first is I want to distinguish power from force. Force is like aggression, it's bullying, it's bulldozing, it's sort of like brute forcing something. It's just applying force to something to try to achieve a result. And a lot of people confuse force with power. Power can show up in many, many, many different ways. I can be really powerful sitting in a conversation where people are arguing about a point in pickleball, and I'm just holding the breath of the moment. So while everyone else is triggered and arguing and frustrated, I can put my attention on my breathing, and I can breathe deeply, and I can do the work to have my nervous system calm down, and I can hold the energy of that moment. That is a form of power. What often happens when we have these reactive pendulum swings away from one surface level type of leadership to another is that we confuse power with force. So Trump, Putin, Jim, Reggie, whoever you want to pick as your sort of person for this, there's a lot of like forceful display of power that is present in the world right now. Arguably not very powerful. Sorry, I should say that forceful display of leadership by force. Not particularly powerful. And in fact, the majority of the time, people apply force when they don't have power. People that generally have access to a lot of power innately as like part of their essence, but have learned to hide that or that it's wrong somewhere along the way, then later on in life, their compensatory strategy tends to be to use force in place of it. And so you see a lot of people who innately bring a lot of power into the space, but they're reliant on force. And I would argue that's what we see with Trump, and that's what we see with Putin. So soft power, the stereotype, the kind of reactive version of that, ends up being people that instead of reliance on force, go to a reactive insistence that they will never bring force. And so what happens is you get people that, you'll get in a meeting and you'll talk for, instead of an hour, you'll talk for 2 hours because the person isn't willing to like hold the container. And you'll have a whole bunch of conversation that doesn't really go anywhere, and so on and so forth. And it's not to say that things don't ever happen, but there's an ineffectiveness. There's a sort of like, can we like get to the point that continually gets stepped over from this reactive approach? So down the one side of over-reliance on force, you see people getting bullied, you see results happening, but in such a way that they leave relationships harmed. You see kind of like discord being sown, you see, all of that sort of stuff. Down the other lens, you see a lack of movement, you see a lack of momentum, you see a lack of results. And so what happens is that we swing back and forth between these two poles. We're like, and unfortunately, bang my mic for emphasis, unfortunately, a lot of this gets pushed up into this false dichotomy of masculine versus feminine. It's like, oh, this masculine approach to leadership doesn't work, we should go this way. And then a feminine approach to leadership would get adopted in some circles. And then at first it's really great because it's better than the blatant overuse of force, but then things don't really happen. And so then people push all the way back to the other side and swing out and are like, we need to do it this way, and back and forth. And neither of these is very effective because both of them, what's fundamentally missing is actually someone who can wield power in a internal, fully expressed way. And so often I find the idea of soft power in leadership more often than not is in the direction we've been describing. It's more reactive. It's more force that's being talked about, and specifically the absence of force. And both of these two directions lack power. Power is the ability to move things forward in a way that leaves everyone on board. We could argue, well, Trump is moving things forward. And yes, that's true. And he's getting what he wants done. Yes, but at the cost of long term. Long term, what is happening is the world is becoming less kind, less generous, less relationally connected. There's less generosity present. The world is becoming more transactional through this approach to leadership. And all of that over time leads us down a path where then more force has to be applied because people get dug in further and further and further. And so that is not really power. Power is something that as time goes on, it grows in the long term, and you require less and less of it. You could think of it a little bit like force is kind of like a drug, where as you take it, you require more and more of it over time to cause the same effect. And you also become more and more reliant on it over time. And so there's sort of like this addictive kind of increase in frequency and quantity nature to force. Power is not like that. In fact, the more someone embodies power, the less of it they have to demonstrate as time goes on. And so really the ontological thing we aim for when it comes to power and leadership is not so much about lead with soft power, because that provides a rule about how you should always lead. Instead, it's about developing the ability to recognize, like, first your own sense of power and to be powerful in yourself, and then what does the moment call for? And a leader who's really attuned to the moment and has the full capacity to express whatever is needed in the moment will be able to discern which side of this stuff is required. So there are going to be times when what's actually needed is to stand for the container of time. Like, for a simple example, this meeting was an hour. We're going to honor our integrity and we're going to end at an hour. I know that there's some other stuff that came up. We can talk about it offline, but for now, we're going to let everyone go. We're going to end the meeting here. And there's other times when the leader might recognize, like, hey, actually, it's really important. Even though I have an agenda, there's something in the space that needs to be discussed. So we're going to set the agenda offside for a second and have 10 minutes just to allow this relational issue to be discussed in the space. And that's we could call it like proper or more powerful, like a transformed exercise of power. It's the ability to flow between these states and feel into what the moment asks for. Yeah. Yeah, I say. Andy's saying his conflict role play is 40 scenarios that couples face in relationships and some cards that help moderate. Dude, that sounds cool. Can you send me that? I'd love to, like, or maybe we should talk about that on here sometime. Let's connect offline anyhow. That sounds really cool. I'd love to hear more about that. And Dave says, what would you call it when folks don't stay on board? Can you elaborate a bit, Dave? Like, do you mean don't stay on board with the direction I'm trying to move things? Like, what do you mean by don't stay on board? It's a bit broad, and I want to make sure that I give that an answer. Okay, well, we nailed soft power and leadership, guys. Way to go. Yay us. Let's edit this name and headline. I think we should talk about the ontology of motivation. So there's this interesting situation unfolding societally, which is that a lot of the old measures and metrics of success are becoming unobtainable, arguably. For example, it used to be work your job, get your pension, buy your house, retire. That was success. That's what people aspired towards. Find a job at a company that'll take care of you, blah, 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 blah. That is by and large eradicated. That doesn't really exist. The pace of change in the world is so heightened. It's very rare to meet people that have stayed at a particular job for longer than 5 years. Layoffs are continual and constant. Housing costs have just increased so much that for most of, probably Gen Z, it's just unobtainable. And so what's happening is a lot of people are finding that these goals that once provided something to aspire towards and to work towards are no longer there. And so, some thinkers in the world, some thought leaders, some people talk about this idea of being in a post-goals, post-aspiration world. And this likens itself a little bit to me to the idea of motivation. So I want to talk about the arc I see people go through in transformational work where it comes to motivation. Typically, as we age, we learn there's certain things about ourselves that are not enough or too much. That's like fear can be boiled down, not to put too fine a point on it, but like to that. You're either too much or you're not enough. And then we learn to compensate for the part of ourselves that might be too much or not enough. So if I have a fear that I'm like stupid, then I'm going to find all these ways to prove to myself and the world that I'm smart. And then over time, that becomes my life journey. I start to chase after the goals that'll prove that. Like I'll go after multiple degrees, or I'll get a job like law that's ostensibly about being the smartest person in the room, or. And so when people start to come and work with someone like me, what's happening is that their initial place that they come into the work from is basically running and putting out the fires caused by their attempt to avoid being the thing they don't want to be. So, if I was describing that law situation, like we'll look at my life, I was constantly trying to do more and more and more and more. I was overworking. I was exhausted. Hey, Sam, lovely to see you. Hola, mi hermano. And I would chase after these things. I would try to prove to myself that I wasn't dumb. And the thing is, we can never get enough of what we don't really need. This compensatory approach to overcoming our fear is, again, like that metaphor of a drug. We can take a bit of the medicine of like, I got my degree, now I'm smart. But it's fleeting because it doesn't actually solve the problem of our fear. It just kind of reinforces it because I got that degree to prove to myself that I'm not dumb, which means I'm not dumb because I got the degree. And as soon as I stop getting that thing, then I'm dumb again. And so it creates this vicious cycle. And so we get locked into this ontological trap of continually striving for the next thing to overcome the underlying fear that's there. And it works less and less, like it lasts shorter and shorter amounts of time. So this is largely how people are motivated when they first come to work with someone like me, or when they first get engaged with a leader who can really support them transformationally, is that they're showing up and they're like, okay, I got to do this. Okay, I got to do that. So the way I like to describe this is it's like your ass is on fire and you're running around trying to put it out. And that's very motivating. Our fear is incredibly motivating. It's arguably one of the most powerful motivators. So what happens down this path is over time we work with this and people start to notice they're the one creating the scenario that reinforces that they might not be smart or generous or whatever. And in creating that scenario themselves, they then have to create a solution, which then recreates the scenario, which then forces them to create a solution. So there's this sort of like flywheel effect. They get into a momentum where they keep somehow creating situations where they are struck by this fear of who they are not, or who they are too much of, or whatever, and then have to overcome it with a solution, which then recreates the problem. And so that's where they come in. They're highly motivated, but the motivation sucks. It's kind of like using petroleum as a fuel source. You know, it's effective, but it poisons our environment and it causes us to have allergies and it makes us sick and it doesn't last long term. You know, all of those problems. It's very much like oil as our source of fuel. And so that's where we begin the journey. And what happens is we start to pull that apart. It's almost like, you know, if you see a film and it's just moving fluidly, we slow it down so you can start to see the individual panels on the film strip. And as you start to do that, you start to recognize like, holy crap, I'm creating the very problem that then I have to solve, which then creates the very problem. And so there's like a whole process by which we start to let go of our resistance to that being the case, and then soften, and then start to really recognize and surrender to like, crap, I'm my own worst enemy. And then we start to dismantle that. And then we have this experience at first of like peace. Holy cow, I don't have to run away from myself. So we can kind of sit down, we can relax. And where that leaves us is a troubling place. Because now fear is no longer motivating us. And so what do we do? What's going to motivate us? We've lost that fuel that we were burning for so long. And a couple things happen at this point. One is that we just want to rest in this new space. We're like, I feel peaceful. I don't want to go anywhere. I don't want to do anything. I want to just chill out. This feels good. That's step one, is just sort of floating there. And that is an important place to be. You know, we can't try to push beyond that. And so how that tends to work for people is at first it's very blissful. And then as time goes on, they start to feel frustrated because there's a lack of motivation in that space. They no longer have fear pushing them forward into their lives, but they also don't have any other thing to motivate themselves because they haven't had to create it until now. And there's a bliss at first because we're like, oh, I no longer have to do that. It's novel, it's easy. What a relaxing time. Oh, I'm so glad I can, all of that. But then it starts to feel a bit listless, like a boat just in the ocean after a storm has passed with crazy winds. At first you're like, thank goodness. But then after a while you're caught in the doldrums. Like, how do we move forward? What do? We just sit here forever? It's boring. It's driving me nuts. The other thing that can happen for people at this point is they become afraid of when they were afraid. So they remember what it was like when they were driven by their fear. They now sit in a place where that no longer happens, but they're afraid to create any new kind of motivation for fear of going back to how things once were. And this is like the really rocky part. This is where we have to learn to motivate, to generate a motivation for ourselves that is something other than fear. And so there's a bunch of places we can do this from. The starting point for this, for me, is that humans are inherently motivated towards something. We inherently have a purpose. We inherently have a desire. The trouble is that we want that to be handed to us through a thunderbolt of insight. And so we sort of like busy ourselves being bored until that happens. Or we consume something to stimulate ourselves until the thunderbolt of insight lands. So like we'll go and play video games a whole bunch because we're not motivated to do anything else. I'm talking about myself, just to be clear. Or we'll go get drunk a whole bunch, or we'll go and party with people a whole bunch, or we'll go and do whatever a whole bunch. And it's like, it's nice on one hand, because it's like, yeah, I don't have to feel that fear that I once felt, and everything feels relaxed. But there's underneath that like a voice that's like, you're not doing very much. Like, you're not really creating the impact you want to create. But because we are stimulating ourselves to deal with this doldrums, what happens is that we never really put ourselves on the spot to generate something new. We're effectively bored and then medicating our boredom. And that just keeps us stuck. And so the hard part about generating motivation is we have to let go of the idea that it's going to strike us like a thunderbolt. And we have to sit down and start choosing something in the face of it not being obvious whether it's the right thing to choose. So we have to ask ourselves like, well, what would be something that I want to take on? And what would I be willing to commit to as far as this is concerned? And this is really tough because during this dark night of the soul or this doldrums kind of part, it's going to feel inauthentic because you haven't yet created a new way of motivating yourself. It's going to feel like pointless. You're going to show up and you're going to be like, all right, I'm going to write this book, but I don't know what to write about. And writing's boring. And this isn't the way it's supposed to be. I should just, if I really wanted to do this, I would be motivated to do it. And that's mixing up how motivation works. And so then we go back and we play more video games and I don't understand why I don't feel motivated. Sooner or later, what will happen is we get to this place where if we're willing to sit down and choose something and commit to it, we have to commit for a period of time. One of two things will happen. You'll get to the end. Well, first you'll quit. That's the most common one. But let's take that off the table and imagine you go all the way through. By the end of your commitment, a couple of things will happen. One, you have developed a new muscle. You have learned how to do something and to discover your motivation in the process of doing it. The second thing that might happen is you will learn how to do something and discover your process of motivation while you do it. And at the end of it, you'll be really clear, that's not what I want to do going forward. What tends to happen instead of that process I just described is that we start something and then we pull out of it 2 months in. We're like the person at the gym in January. And because we pull out of it so quickly, we never learn how to generate our motivation. And as a result, we continually get stuck in this new process, which is like, go do something until I can't do it, and like go be bored, mitigate my boredom until I'm sick and tired of it, try something new, it didn't work, conclude that the problem was that I just didn't know the right thing that I wanted to do, go back and medicate myself more until I do find the right thing that I want to do. I had to adjust my glasses there. And so this is really toxic to our ability to generate, to be at cause in our lives for creating what we want. And the way we get beyond this is like, it has a few components. The first is the power of commitment. Before commitment is the power of choice. So we have to choose something. We have to say, I'm going to choose this and I'm going to really give it a go for however long. And when we've taken fear out of the equation, that choice becomes harder. The nice thing about fear is it takes away your choice. It chooses for you. Do this or you die. Do this or you will lose your house. Do this or your kids will leave you. Great, I'm going to do this. Without that fear, you actually now are on the hook yourself to be the one making the choice. And that's much harder because it puts you at a risk of doing the wrong thing. And once we choose, even if it's the wrong thing, we have to attach commitment to it so that we stay the course. And then once those two things are on the table, then we can start to discover ourselves along the journey. And so I think what we're going to start to see in this modern world, this post-aspirational, post-goals-based world, is we're going to start to see more doldrums. We're going to see more resignation. And I don't think we're going to see less fear. I think we're going to see people more resigned and thus unable to feel their fear. You know, there's two kind of ways we tend to go. One is that we let our fear lead us around by the nose. The other one is that um, we become resigned to the way that feels, and then we stop caring about it. And then it just sits there at a very low level below our consciousness or just at the threshold of it, but we don't feel motivated to do anything. And so I think that's what we're going to start to see more of. And down either of those paths, the journey out is to start to get present to our fear, notice how it's creating the reality that we keep reacting to, get ourselves free from that, sit in the doldrums, and then, some people will cross this threshold into what I'm describing as like this new form of motivating ourselves and of living our life from our own innate essence and self-expression, but many people will not. And there's no harm or foul in that. The nature of the world is not that everyone should transform or should create a new way. Like if you want to look at this spiritually and karmically, we all have our journey and our path and our karma to move through. And for people that like live their life running through from fear to fear, that's okay. It's not a indictment of them. It's just helpful for us to notice that each of us has a choice and that we get to make that choice if we choose it. Cool. Well, people have gotten quiet, which is usually a sign that people are feeling blown out or tired, or I'd love to hear anything else y'all want to put in here. I'm going to speak, I think, to the Art of Unlearning. And then we'll see if I want to do one more topic. And if you are like, no, do one of those other topics, let me know if there's a particular topic there that's juicy for you. Oh, stretch that back. That felt good. Just going to look over here at my comment section. Click that comment box. Cool. Ooh, load more comments. Oh, cool. Excellent. Okay. So let's talk about the Art of Unlearning. We should update this head design. So transformational work, the way most change, the way most of our learning process operates is that there's something new for us to learn. So if it's like, I want to become a lawyer, I have to learn this new way of speaking, this new way of thinking, this new way of showing up, this new set of skills. Bye, Cynthia. Thanks for hanging out. This new way of doing X or Y or Z, and then we go to learn it. And so that's our default as humans, is we are additive in our process. We are looking to add more into the mix. And when we consider our progress, like how far along are we tend to look, what's the word I want? It starts with a C. I can't remember. It doesn't matter. Cumulatively. We look at our experience from a cumulative perspective, like how much have I accumulated? How much have I added into the system? And then we let that conclude for us, I'm a good leader. I must be a good teacher or whatever. And so that's the default window we're looking at. And so anytime we approach these things we might want, like how do I let go of my sense of injustice? Or how do I, learn better to bring power into my leadership or stuff like that? We tend to look through the lens of what's the thing I need to add? What's the thing I need to learn? What's the extra step I need to receive? And the irony of transformational work is it tends to be more about unlearning stuff than it is about learning stuff. So what happens as we age is we learn, again, this part of me is not okay. And then we learn the strategies that allow us to keep that part hidden or in check or in jail or managed on some level. And that's where we stay stuck. And then over time, we are adding more stuff to our stack, if you like. But the irony is that we're adding more stuff to the stack that serves continuing to keep that thing in check. So if I learned to fear sadness, I might have become a man who kind of keeps his sadness very low to the ground and stays very stoic. I'm a very stoic man. And then I learn, like, then I have this experience being around like these people, like maybe I become a doctor and I'm constantly around families that are, whatever. And I learn how to like better keep those emotions in check and so on and so forth. So I'm always learning new strategies that allow me on some level to cope better, but hold that thing that I can't be within myself at bay. And when we come into a transformational context, we're desperately trying to figure out, sorry, let me slow down or take a step back. One, the more we learn to hold a part of ourselves in check in jail, the more there's going to be something in our life missing. And it's not usually what we think it is. So like if you learn to hold sadness in check so that you don't have to feel sadness, you might think, well, sadness is missing from my life, but that's great. I'm a joyful person. I'm happy, blah, 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 blah. Yes, but you're not happy, because we can only be as happy as we're willing to feel sad on the back end. Like if you tell me you love roller coasters, but you hate the parts that are a dip that go down, but you love going up, well, that's not really, you're going to end up with these wacky roller coasters that are missing a whole bunch of the stuff. And so when we cut out parts of our life, we also miss the reciprocal parts of our life. Anytime you cut something out, you're also cutting out something else. And it's almost never like the thing you want. So if you cut out the opportunity for people to betray you, you lose the ability to have a life based in trust. If you cut out the ability to be heartbroken, you lose the ability to truly love. If you cut out the ability to be sad, you lose the ability to be truly joyful. If you cut out the ability of being stupid, you lose the ability to revel in brilliance. And so there's this reciprocal nature of all this stuff. And when we show up to transformational work, we're usually like craving that reciprocal thing that's been made unavailable to us by virtue of what we cut out. And what we come looking for is like the next additive thing. Adam, teach me the technique that will help me have joy. Maybe it's a meditation approach I need. Maybe it's an affirmation. Maybe I need to change the way I'm focusing on things. So we're looking for that, like that thing to add on to the mix that will then get us where we need to be. And alas, that's not how it works. The art of transformation is rooted in the art of unlearning. Learning first how we set all this stuff up, and then learning how to unlearn that. That's a mouthful. Learning how to set that aside so that we can then be with the thing that our whole stack was designed to avoid having to be with. And this is really frustrating for people that have spent a lot of time learning about things. So often in initial conversations with people, I'll notice a way of being. Like I might notice someone is super, super fast, or I might notice that they apologize for themselves a lot. And almost definitely, if I reflect that to them, they'll say something along the lines of, well, no, I mean, I've done a lot of work in slowing down, or I've done a lot of work in like standing for my value and stuff. And they probably have, but it's all been done on top of this stack. So what's happened is like someone who has learned to apologize for themselves probably has gone to a bunch of like assertion courses or like how to be more confident in yourself, but they're layering being more confident on top of the underlying story that they're a bother or that they're annoying or whatever. And so they've learned all these ways to do things, but who they're being remains the same. This is why this sort of transformational experience is elusive for us. Glasses, tough to get on with headphones. This is why this stuff remains so elusive for us, is because we can do and do and do and do and add to our stack, and all it does is it reinforces the existing paradigm. And so transformational work is especially frustrating for people when they first get into it, because it kind of flies in the face of our identity about ourselves and all the work we feel we've learned. And the hard part is learning how to unlearn that stuff. And as we do that and start to set these side parts of ourselves aside, we come closer and closer to that which we don't want to touch. And as we do that, what happens is we learn how to be with that part. We can start to touch it, and we notice all the confrontation and all the stuff that drives up. And then, but slowly we can start to soften our nervous system around it. We can relax into it. And when we do that, then all of these strategies we built fall away. And what happens next is the miracle. What happens next is now all of that learning you did to be confident and assertive can actually take root in fertile soil. Up until this point, it's sort of like if you were a farmer who'd learned all of the best seeding techniques and all of the best fertilization techniques, but you were planting in barren ground. Your soil had nothing in it. And so, I come and I'm like, I notice you're planting in barren soil. And you'd say, no, I don't think that's true. Like, I have really learned a lot about how to seed soil, how to fertilize it, how to do everything right. But it's all being done over top of this need to keep your soil barren for whatever reason. I'm stretching the metaphor, but thanks for hanging with me. And what happens as we start to get you closer to that and to confront the reason you created your soil as barren in the first place and have you heal that, then what happens is those techniques can take root in fertile soil. They can actually start to matter. And so the irony of this is, like, until you unlearn, the stuff you've learned doesn't really matter. Until you really are able to pull that all away and kind of set aside your attachment to, no, I've learned this, no, I have this knowledge. Until you can set that aside, it doesn't matter that you have the knowledge, because it's just going to continue to glance off of you. It's not going to make the difference. And so it's very ironic. The way this work opens us up is we learn a bunch of stuff and then we set it aside, and we have to be willing to, like, not know it and to dismiss all of it. And then as we do so, we can bring it back in and things can really change. I'll give you one example, and then I think we'll wind down. So when I was a project manager, hey, Rocky, nice to see you, brother. When I was a project manager, I was hyper focused on efficiency. And I had all of these strategies and systems in place. I got into Getting Things Done by Richard Allen. Richard Allen? Yeah, that's his name, which is a methodology for, like, tracking all of your tasks. I had bought this program that was programmatic, like you could program it so that I'd had, like, if on Monday it's the first of the month, show me this and add this to my task list, all of that stuff. And so I was hyper efficient with my time. The only problem was that my underlying relationship to time was that it was scarce. And so, of course, from a story that my time was scarce, I was hyper efficient. You got to make the most of your time because there's only so much of it. So use it, use it, use it, use it. And so what was happening is all of that productivity stuff, it's not that it didn't do anything. It's just that it continued to reinforce my underlying conversation that time was scarce. And so even if I managed to scrape out, an extra hour of time, that hour would be scarce. And the funny thing is, if we have an experience, if we have an underlying belief that time is scarce, for example, then we will, David Allen, thank you so much, Lydia. Not Richard Allen, David Allen did Getting Things Done. If we have an underlying belief that time is scarce, that's going to dictate the actions we take, and the actions we take will create an experience of time being scarce. So all of this strategy I was awash in hyper effective and efficient strategies, and all they did, no matter how effective I got, left me feeling like time was scarce. And so guess what I needed from that place? One more part of the strategy, maybe one more app. Maybe I get Todoist, and then maybe I need a context system rather than a task-based system so that I'm managing my stuff just the right way. Gah! And so what happened was I got into a relationship with a coach who was really able to make a difference for me. And the first thing she said is like, wow, it seems like time is really scarce to you. And I said, no, I've got like a system. I'm really reliable. Like I really make the most of time. I really blah, blah, blah. So there's my resistance. No, you're wrong. Thanks for that, little one. But I actually am a master of time management. And so because of that, my time's not scarce. And my coach just lovingly allowed me to be right about that until the next time, and then would reflect to me that it seemed like time is really scarce. And over time, I could start to like let go of this and unlearn this idea that I knew how to manage time really effectively or whatever. And so it meant setting aside all of that stuff and creating a new relationship with time. And the way that happened is I had to actually let go of everything I was doing to try to keep time being scarce off to the side and actually sit in the experience of the scarcity of time that I had created for myself. And as I started to do that, then I could start to learn from that, and I could start to shift that belief and that experience until I got to the point where I didn't have a lot of stuff managing my time. It was just like pretty free and open and pretty blissful. And then I started to create from that place. And I had this experience like, oh, wow, time's really lovely. And like, I feel spacious. And when people cancel, I don't get all bent out of shape anymore. I'm like, hell yeah, more time in my day. Sweet. Thanks for the day off. Much, much more fun. Way better place to be in. And from there, I could then start to reintroduce these structures that I'd learned, but I was planting them in fertile soil. I was no longer managing my time from a place of being afraid of how scarce it was. I was now managing my time from a place of knowing it was abundant. And that allowed a radically different experience to show up. You know, it allowed way more fluidity and freedom and blah, 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 blah. And so the thing I find kind of cool is those structures came back, but there was a period where I had to let them go and be without them before I could bring them back in. And the way this, I like this, the way I think this is best exemplified is one of my teachers once said, anytime you have like a really strong muscle, it's really helpful to set it aside for a while. Because if you do that, it's going to force you to build a new muscle. If you rely on something and you set that aside, it's going to teach you, you're going to have to adapt. And it requires some commitment to set aside that muscle. But if we're willing to do that, then we can learn something new. And so this is a bit that process of unlearning. That's how that goes. Okay. Chat's pretty quiet. That's usually a good sign that we're at the end of our time here. So what didn't we talk about? We didn't talk about the impact of blame. We didn't talk about the ontology of readiness, and we didn't talk about the ontology of playing in high stakes arenas. So we'll cover that next time, I think, probably most likely, if people want to hear about that. Oh, we should change this to outro. Update this headline. Outro. I reached out to my first ontological coach, which is to say like a coach that could support me transformationally. Recently, I was thinking about her, and I just wrote her to ask like, hey, what was your experience of coaching me? And so I'm going to read this now, but I also will read it like at our next live show, maybe earlier in the process, because I think it's really beautiful what she shared, and it speaks to like, you know, who I was and who she had to be for me, and the process by which we work with people, and sort of the lack of justice and all of that. And so I wrote her, and I was just like, hey, you know, I'd love to hear, you know, what was your experience? And she said, it's great to hear from you. You know, imagine a journey of discovery for both client and coach. It's a dance. I knew the dance, her, Deb. I knew the dance, and you, Adam, had it that I didn't, was the experience I had. So I let you lead. I was never concerned about your journey because I knew you'd land on your feet. Yes, arrogance showed up. I held the space for your fear, that youthful exuberance and the sadness of you trying to make it happen versus allowing it to happen. The hardest part for me as a coach is to leave my skill outside the call and connect to the client. And you gave me lots of practice, and for that, I'm grateful. She says, you coached yourself. I was fortunate to witness your transformation, and the gift for me was to see myself in you. Oh yes, I was coached around you for months, meaning she got coaching on how to coach me. The hardest part of coaching you is giving up my right to be right. To have this beautiful soul so vulnerable and transparent changed me. I'm sitting here in gratitude for the gift of get over yourself that you gave me. For I too was struggling with midlife and integration of my coaching as if they were separate, only to discover I am coach. And I validate and create that with my clients. So beautiful, you know, so cool for me to get to read that. And like, you know, like there's an inherent, hopefully you can hear that inherent injustice I'm talking about, where I showed up, she had kind of like I know how to do this dance, and I was holding that she was wrong often. I remember it very well. And her practice was to set aside that she knew how to do this dance and just be with me in relationship and let your wrong from me, let that energetically be in the space and explore that with me and allow it in the space. And that's inherently unjust because she knew what she was doing. She knew how to do this work. And yet, by setting that aside, by setting aside her righteousness about that, which, as you can hear in her words, was a practice and required support and coaching and work. But by being able to set that aside, she learned something new. And most importantly, I got to be in my process and learn something new. So we'll cover that again next week. I might talk a little bit more on it, but like I love that. And it was interesting. That was a bumpy as hell ride. And I over time appreciate Deb more and more for who she was for me and how much work I can imagine it must have been to not to contain me, but to like hold a space for me. Because there was a lot in there that was sort of like dying to get out and then simultaneously held in check by a very powerful control mechanism. That's a lot to hold space for. All right, cool beans. Little bit of plugs before we finish up. If you're not yet planning, like if you're not aware of the intensive, what cave have you been living in, you dodo? You should come. It's May 27th through May 30th here in Victoria, British Columbia. It's a transformational space. It is in service of you unlearning. It is in service of you getting the thing that will actually make a difference rather than just adding more skill or technique or thought process or whatever on top of things. It's designed to support you to touch that thing that once transformed will radically alter and change your life. It's going to be a blast. It's a great way if you kind of love this work and want more community around it. This is an amazing place to come and get that experience. It's very intimate. We kind of cap out at around 20 to 30 people, and it's quite affordable. It's $1,500 US up until May 1st. So we've got early bird pricing up until then, and then from May 1st onward, it's $2,000 US. You will fall in love with this city. Victoria is so beautiful in May and very, very walkable. It's an incredible opportunity to come and get to explore a city that a lot of people just think is absolutely cool and beautiful. And you get to hang out with me and with Bay and with people that are in this work. So definitely check that out. I'm told that I can't put the link in the comments, so I'll just write it right here. What do we do? Evergrowth. Am I typing this right? Yeah. Evergrowth coaching.com/the-intensive. I think that worked. Definitely come and check it out. It's going to be an amazing time, and we look forward to seeing you. And finally, if you don't check out the podcast, you should. You can catch all of these on audio, and also I usually do at least once a week a smaller episode of about 20 minutes. So you can look for the Transformational Leader. That's where you can get these direct to whatever your device is. And lastly, if you're not already subscribed, whoops, that didn't work. That was my, there we go. If you're not already subscribed to my email newsletter, you should come check that out too. I usually put once a week some insights, usually a blog post or some thoughts about whatever's up for me. I also post those out to Facebook and stuff, but you know how social media is. The landscape these days is so saturated with AI, it's hard to find the signal through the noise. And so if this is the sort of signal that you like, subscribe to that newsletter. Yeah. Have an amazing weekend, and we'll catch you guys soon. Peace. Now I got to click on stream. Goodbye.